about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. We stand firmly against the war on science that is predicated on the appeal to nature fallacy, which is the belief that whatever is natural must be good and whatever is unnatural must be bad. This belief has become an impediment to advances in areas such as human health, social progress, and even environmental progress. In the field of medicine, the appeal to nature fallacy has already led to catastrophic outcomes. Resistance to vaccines threatens public health and the lives of children. The unwarranted resistance to GMOs has not only held back the fight against climate change, but it has also hampered our ability to feed the developing world as well. Campaigns against GMOs have also held back efforts to ward off the deadly Aedes aegypti mosquito, which has killed countless millions as a carrier of disease and plagues. The scientific consensus concerning the safety of GMOs is solidly supported in every major scientific organization across the planet. The only thing green about being anti-GMO is the extra cash that is made by overcharging for expensive boutique food. But that won't cut it when it comes to raising crops with accelerating heat stress, droughts, floods, disease, and insect infestations brought on by a hotter planet. It makes no sense to accept the call of the IPCC for decarbonization within the next 12 years and yet reject their conclusion that these goals are impossible without nuclear power, which has proven itself to be the cleanest, safest, and most reliable way of achieving decarbonization. It is the most reliable way to decarbonize simply because the alternatives of weather-dependent power sources are inherently unreliable. And nuclear is the cleanest energy source because it is the only form of energy production that completely encases its waste stream. Super safe, advanced Generation 4 reactors, which will almost completely convert existing nuclear waste to centuries worth of energy, are coming very close to commercialization. In fact, it goes completely against most everything we're led to believe, but nuclear is legitimately the safest form of energy generation according to all the accepted worldwide energy fatality data. But there is one thing that nuclear is not safe for, and that is the fossil fuel industry. The fact of the matter is that the fossil fuel industry has a long history of funding the anti-nuclear movement, along with climate change deniers, to protect their bottom line. Solid science is in dire need of a champion. And that is what eco-modernism is all about. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction, as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land, resources, and energy, enabling walkable cities that facilitates the more efficient use of mass public transit as well. It must be emphasized that our support for technological solutions is definitely not about defending industrial polluters, nor does our defense of technology imply that we just need to sit back and let things take care of themselves. To the contrary, we believe that humanity is at a crossroads that severely threatens our future on this planet. We reject the idea of resource limits on many levels. The advance of science has a long history of getting around problems of resource scarcity and will continue to do so. Another reason is that Earth is just one of a multitude of worlds available to explore in our solar system and beyond. Comets and asteroids are untapped reservoirs for raw materials. If we could find a way to thrive in artificial ecosystems off-world, we could use what we learn to help sustain terrestrial ecosystems here on Earth. I hope by now you understand the worthiness of our cause. Ecomodernism is really only a philosophy at this time. I want to talk to you about the necessity of turning it into a movement, which will be part of the larger environmentalist movement. For it is only through our presence and participation that there can be any hope of moving environmentalism in the right direction. Our aim is not to divide the environmental movement, but rather to multiply its numbers with the incorporation of many scientific and educational communities that is working to both build chapters of eco-modernist societies and support our growth worldwide. We aspire to increase our numbers by bringing together the numerous supporters of climate action that have been alienated by mainstream environmentalism's wildly contradictory support for the shutting down of nuclear power plants in the midst of a climate emergency, and welcome them into our ranks. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Gabe Ignetti, and Chris Bergen is in the waiting room, is in the wings. I anticipate our guest will be joining us shortly. Until then, let me queue up some news, and we can discuss some news. We can talk about all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Let's make that announcement though first. That'd be the first thing.
Yeah, well, I guess the thing is that we're talking about changing our. In fact, let's put that on screen.
I think it's already decided that we got a consensus on that, So
Yeah,
yeah, we're
let's
going on yeah. Go
yeah
ahead, Carl.
let's go. Let's go at next week. Starting next week, that'll be March. Um,
20
yeah,
no March.
yes, yeah. The
Let me
first
see.
show in March.
March
So
3rd. March
yeah,
3rd.
March 3rd. We'll go ahead and start at 10 a.m. Pacific, and that's 1 p.m. Eastern.
Eastern.
Few
Right.
few bits of information on all of our pre-roll stuff needs to be updated, unfortunately. But
Okay. I can fix that. I just downloaded it, so I can fix that.
yeah, if you have the original,
Yeah.
or if you wanna do or maybe if we want to refresh the pre-roll, that would be amazing as well.
Yeah. I have some, like I said, I have some material here. I'm gonna send it to you in a little while. I was telling Carl that that I had contacted BMI, who does they protect the copyrights for music, and I asked them, is there a special cost or is it free or whatever for nonprofits to use to play their music? And they said that on YouTube it is free. And and he's pretty sure it's ASCAP too. He says because YouTube pays the bill. And so I'm working on right now. I just finished working on some really nice. I think it's really nice. I like the brick, but a really nice climate jam, I call it. Which is educational and a lot of fun. It includes the Yardbirds, Shape of Things. You guys remember the Yardbirds by any chance? Are you too? You don't know the Yardbirds?
I
Oh
don't
my
know the
God!
Yardbirds.
Yeah,
Oh
I
man,
know the Yardbirds a little,
I
yes.
figured you would.
Good.
Carl's a youngster. What can I say?
Yeah.
How about the song Gasoline by Sheryl Crow?
What song is that again?
Gasoline, Gasoline
Gasoline by
by
Sheryl
Sheryl Crow.
Crow. Sheryl Crow,
Nope.
Crow, right?
She used to be a music teacher. Dude, you should know who she is. She was on cover of
I know.
Rolling
It's my
Stone like
hearing.
20
I know
years ago.
Sheryl Crow. I know Sheryl Crow. It's just that my hearing is not that good. Like that, I don't pick up the words sometimes. I just want to make double sure. Yeah, okay. I've never gotten into Sheryl Crow. Uh, and is she good?
Yeah. Yeah, she's good.
Yeah, she recorded a duet with Sting, and Sting is another artist who might have some
Oh, I
stuff
love
for
Sting.
Doesn't
the
Sheryl
jam.
Crow
I
have
love Sting.
Grammys?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a song that a song I might put do use as a theme, which is "Walking in Your Footsteps," which is Sting. You know that song? It's very apropos.
Nice.
But I don't know if you heard that song, but they say the meek shall inherit the earth. It speaks about the dinosaurs, extinction. It's a song about extinction. Sting's great, man. But anyhow, what's in the news, Carl? Anything you came up with?
Well, there's there's a whole bunch of like little tweets here, and I'm looking for um the best of them.
Okay.
Oh, Kentucky, that's a good one. Let's talk about that. That'll be.
All right.
We've got a Kentucky is one of the anti-nuclear states, unfortunately, and so here is a Here's an article we've got from the Kentucky Lantern. Bill promoting nuclear energy advanced by Senate committee. If you don't mind, you could just watch the stream for the graphic on this, because otherwise it'll take me a little longer to set up. But basically, they're trying to promote the University of Kentucky in order to have a reactor research project basically get going again. So Senate Bill 198, if you're in Kentucky, look up Senator Danny Carroll and check out Senate Bill 198. They have a report, and the report said there are no insurmountable barriers to developing nuclear energy in Kentucky. They're recommending creating a non-regulatory authority to educate the public on nuclear energy while aiding the state in its development. They're contracting and looking for site sustainability to find the best locations, and they're hoping that would be at the University of Kentucky Center for Applied Energy Research to do that study, just the suitability study. Quote, in the distant future, and maybe not so distant future, we're seeing coal production decrease. We're going to have to start looking for other sources of baseload energy to power this country, and I'm convinced without a doubt that nuclear is the answer to the problems that we're going to be facing in that time. Some really great coverage, a really great opportunity to promote nuclear in yet another venue. So we're looking at options to get more people to support nuclear energy all across America and all across the world, and this is one of them. So yeah, Kentucky Senate Bill 198. It's a really good opportunity there.
Kentucky is a coal state traditionally, going back for 4, 5, 6 generations. So the fact that they're recognizing coal is going down, and they need jobs, and they don't have uranium mines, but there are other jobs in the nuclear industry which can support them at as well or better than what they've been earning in the coal mines without the risk of black lung, etc. So
yeah. Now you guys might not notice, maybe you do. There's a lot of coal waste, I'm sure, in Kentucky. Is thorium in coal waste?
Well, there's definitely a tiny bit of uranium in it. There could be some. Let's see, is thorium? I know comes up with monazites. Is there thorium in granite? But there'll definitely be thorium in anything that brings up like rare earths, and so it could be possible that you'd have some thorium.
Could be,
but
I'm pretty sure there is.
Yeah, I've heard there's definitely a lot of uranium in cold waste. There's a fairly significant amount of radioisotopes that come up with coal. We have to watch out for radon, definitely.
Right.
And this is indicative of a number of isotopes that have daughter products.
Yeah, I mean, what they really have to figure out in Kentucky and West Virginia and all these states is like how do we process that? How to turn all that nasty stuff into something useful?
Why would that be important, Gabe? Why would that be worth anyone's while to reprocess?
Well,
I think most
it
of our
would make
viewers
it
know this, but
yeah, it would make it more cost effective to clean the environment, right? Because if they could process that stuff somehow and turn it into products, I've heard that they
like, how about products like more electricity? You get as much electricity.
I'm talking about the waste. I'm talking about the
Yes. You take the coal ash and you filter out the uranium, which is in it in tiny amounts, and the uranium that you get left over from coal ash, you can make as much electricity about an equivalent amount as what you originally got from the coal. You can double the amount of electricity made from coal if you filter out that uranium and make yellow cake out of it put that in a reactor.
Yeah. Interesting. That's if you turned it into nuclear energy. Well, that's
correct.
That's good. Then that's actually possible to do.
It's possible. No one's done it. Maybe they don't see it as cost effective.
That's the
Probably.
question.
Yeah, it's probably not
But
economic at all, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So the next piece of great news is in Georgia, Vogel 4 has reached initial criticality. So that means that they have done all of the initial certification and all of the requirements to satisfy starting up the nuclear reaction have been met. And what this means is that over the course of the next many months, this plant is going to do load testing, and eventually it will be connected to the grid. So the announcement from Georgia Power, we are proud to share that Unit 4 has achieved initial criticality. This means that our skilled team of operators has safely started the nuclear reaction inside the second reactor, the second new reactor. That's the fourth of the total at the site. This milestone signifies a pivotal step towards starting electricity generation. The new Vogel units are an essential part of our commitment to delivering clean, reliable, and affordable energy to all of our customers. For more information, here's the link. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. The press release from Georgia Power.
Yeah. That was the very first iteration of the AP1000, right?
Right. Well, it's the second of the first American AP1000s to be completed. Of course, there are AP1000s that were copied and brought to China intentionally, called the CAP1000 or the Chinese AP1000. And I think that that design is now known as the Hulong 1. And so China's Hulong 1 has some history with American collaboration.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I was seeing that they were saying, there's this thing that was saying, well, why was it so expensive to build the Vogel and this kind of pretty much the same reactor built in China, way less in time, way less in money too. So I think part of that was because it was when they built it, it was the first. Both of them were the first to be built. And that's when you work out the bugs, right? That's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. You're also retraining people to do it. The few people who had built a nuclear reactor previously had been like 20, 25 years old, 30 years old. Now they're coming back 30 years later when they are supervisors and they've never built a reactor as a supervisor. Everyone is rusty. Everyone had to relearn and reteach themselves and double check every step they made because they weren't certain. Normally you do that anyway, building a reactor. Perhaps they were triple or quadruple checking every step they took because they couldn't remember what followed what. Also, it's cheaper in China because they didn't have to satisfy the regulator the same way we did in the U.S. Not to say that they're unsafe in China, but China just said, do it right, probably. Or they maybe worked with their people in a positive manner, more than the NRC does. Also, China directly financed it from the government. They didn't go to the banks and have at least a third, maybe more than a third of the cost being interest on the loan accruing against the value of the reactor as they were building it even. That happened here in the U.S. So there's a lot of little reasons why China had an advantage in building.
Yeah, the regulations too, the NRA is like they run you through hoops. I heard that there was a big section of that reactor when they were building it that that the NRC forced them to tear it down and rebuild it a different way.
Not so much they forced them, but they chose a path. They chose a very specific path in building it, where they said, we will do it right the way we've discussed we've done it right. And then they did not do it right. The contractor came in and used minimum standard rebar when they said they were going to use higher standard rebar And so they did not build it to the specifications I said they were going to build it at. The rebar was probably good enough. The rebar and the cement was probably good enough, but they said they were going to do an extra super duper nice job with the rebar, and they just did a pretty good job, an adequate job, even for a nuclear plant, but they didn't do it correct. So the NRC just called them out and said, "No, you didn't tell us the truth."
Right.
And so they had to tear everything out and redo it the way they said they would, because that was the agreement that they had made.
Yeah.
So it's not so much the NRC's fault; it's their fault for the NRC's fault for paying attention. Kind of like an umpire in a baseball game. Oh, if the umpire turns around, who knows if the baseball player turned around and hit the catcher from the opposing team? You know, they were paying attention, and they called them out on something when they did wrong.
I found another article here. I'll put it in both of our chats, the stream chat as well as our in Zoom chat. This is an article from Reuters. Let's see what date. There we go. About 6 months ago, it was updated. Initially published in 2023, and so this is about cost and schedule overruns, about the rework that had to be done. The idea that Chris Bergen here is presenting is that the NRC is very, very attentive to specifications, to all of the claims that contractors make, and if you do not follow up with your claims, you will be in trouble. So
no, that's reasonable. That's reasonable.
If the people building it had specified in the first place they were going to build just an average nuclear rebar for the containment, and the NRC had agreed to it, everything would have been fine. But they said that they were going to do an extra good job, and then they did an average job for a nuclear reactor.
Yeah,
that was the trip up.
Yep. And then there's the question of what happens with all of these guys as far as they have the skill now. Do they get to use it again?
They're already gone. They're already gone working other jobs, most of them non-nuclear probably, in the US or Canada. A handful maybe went overseas to work on nuclear projects. Some of them probably went overseas to work on non-nuclear projects because they are highly valued workers.
Yeah. I mean, they need to build them more, but that seems like a far cry. I don't know. There's money in the federal government, though. There's quite a bit of money in the federal government, according to the law, I believe. If someone wants to build a nuclear reactor, I think that's for loan money, I believe, right? Do you know anything about that?
So
there is a loan office with Jigger Shaw, and there are some tax incentives if they go through with it, but they have to have a plan to build it that is approved by the NRC. So the next reactor they get built in the US is going to be 4 to 10 years down the road, period. And those tax incentives may not be there in 6 years, 10 years from now. But Jiggershaw is currently, as far as I know, he still is the head of a loan office in the federal government, part of the Department of Energy. And he's more than happy to loan money out to people. He's more than happy to sit down with them and help them fill out their own loan paperwork so that they get it done right the first time. But first you have to have someone that's willing to take that long slog through the NRC. And no one's looking at in the immediate future, no one's looking at building. There are a few projects that are proposed, but no one's gone far enough to get full approval from the NRC yet.
Yeah. I think the molten salt is going to have a lot more success, just alone because from what I understand, the Chinese are already have plans to use it on their naval ships, which will give their ships a tremendous advantage in speed over American ships. And when you mess with the Navy, man, they're going to build. They're going to build it. They're not going to allow U.S. Navy to be slower than the Chinese Navy. So
that's That's a pretty interesting approach. I would definitely, wonder if a thorium reactor has the same ability to ramp as a highly enriched uranium reactor. This is the real problem, is that you would have to have not just a fertile blanket of fuel, but you would have to have a large body of fissile fuel in order to reach a very, very high flux that produces a burst of power. And that's what the American submarine fleet, runs on highly enriched uranium. And so that's where the power comes from, is being able to go up and down. And if...
Go
ahead.
Do you remember the physics of salt? When salt heats, it expands.
Right. But not as much as water. Yeah.
Right, but it will move the dissolved U-233 or 235, whatever's in there. It'll move it in and out closer, and that's part of the ramping. You take energy out of it, it contracts and it holds that. So it will respond in milliseconds, whether it responds with the huge ramping that we're talking about. Okay, I'm not 100% sure on that, but moderate ramping, absolutely it would.
Nice.
And it'll do that without any operator intervention. It does it on its own. It self-regulates.
Yeah, it'll be safe. It'll be a safe reaction. And essentially, this is what happened with EBR-2, which was a uranium reactor. This was a experimental breeding reactor, and it had a fuel configuration that allowed the fuel elements to separate. It was a molten, was it molten sodium cooled? I think it might have been.
Don't recall.
And so the other, submerged under molten sodium. So yeah, EBR, a really great example of a reactor that is molten sodium and had the fuel elements inside it, so that when that went over power without any cooling, the fuel elements moved further apart, and that was enough to reduce criticality. So yeah, different ways of achieving the same thing. It's very good.
But I mean, from what I've read, molten salt reactors are better at load following, supposedly. So if they're better at load following, I would think they'd also be able to go up and down real quick in terms of punching out energy on a sub or a ship. That'd be better than.
I'd like to think so. I don't know if it'll do it to
Sorry, guys.
a huge degree. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Well,
All right.
25 minutes late. Oh, shit. I'm so sorry.
Hey, that's all right. Totally did that.
Should have
we'll get
some
back on
kind of
with
notification for the
our,
calendar event or something.
Yeah. It's okay. We're glad you're here. So,
Yeah.
okay. So,
Thanks.
Carl, why don't you do this? Why don't you start kind of with the welcome, we're starting from the beginning. This way I could just edit that whole chunk out, and we'll start from scratch, and we'll talk about your new book.
All right.
Yeah.
From the top, I'll give a clap, and then we'll start the show.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Gabriel Ignetti, Chris Bergen, and our special guest, Rauli Partanen. Rauli is an award-winning science writer, energy communicator, and environmental activist. His latest book, The Age of Energy, Understanding Growth, Prosperity, and Environmental Destruction, was released in 2022. Partanen also leads a nonprofit think tank and consultancy, Think Atom, which he co-founded in 2018, and which focuses on enabling deep and rapid decarbonization with new nuclear energy and technologies. Rauli will speak on his latest book, The Age of Energy, Understanding Growth, Prosperity, and Environmental Destruction. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
So I know that you've done some great work in Finland. I know there's even long-term anti-nuclear organizations like the Green Party have started to turn in places like Finland. What can you tell me about that? That's very exciting.
I'd say that they're pretty much turned. They're no more anti-nuclear than any other party in Finland, and that started around the same time that I'm not saying that I'm the reason for that, but the turning started around 10 years ago, something like that, with some members in the party just kind of checking the evidence and realizing that the opposition to nuclear is not based on that evidence, and nuclear would be a great solution for decarbonizing the energy supply. So they started to advocate inside the party and try to kind of step by step, slowly to change the official party line and have those discussions in there, while me and a group of other advocates and activists started to have those discussions kind of outside the Green Party in the wider society. So we just basically started calling out anti-nuclear BS, so to speak, and presenting the evidence. We wrote books, we wrote articles, just kind of it's grinding, but if you do it long enough, it starts to have an effect, and then when it really starts, then it kind of can move really, really fast. So let's say in 2017 we had a seminar called Deep Decarbonization with Advanced Nuclear, and that was the first time that mainstream media made clearly positive and kind of optimistic stories about advanced nuclear reactors, because they kind of maybe got a new perspective. We weren't talking about the horribly late, horribly expensive big reactors that we also had, but kind of gave them a new perspective, and that turned the media around. And nowadays it's I mean, of course you have some bad articles here and there, but it's mostly quite good. So
wonderful.
Yeah, it's long journey.
That is a great perspective, and all the while you've been with the movement to sort of communicate the science. You've learned a whole lot, and I imagine very much of that is in this new book. So what does this book have in terms of bringing the evidence and the understanding of where we as a human race is going with energy?
Well, it's not a book about nuclear. But I have a saying that it's the most pro-nuclear book that is not about nuclear, because it brings all the evidence kind of behind human prosperity and environmental degradation and economic growth, and the kind of some of the weaknesses on how we measure those things. For example, economic growth, GDP growth. Basically, there's a correlation with human well-being, but it gets weaker after some spots. So in developing countries, there is a very clear correlation and even causation between growth and prosperity and human well-being. But then at some point, we can start to have this kind of uneconomic growth, that you are actually causing damage. Then again, there is a lot of evidence for decoupling of economic growth from environmental harm or carbon emissions and stuff like that. So it's really a complex topic that we kind of try to tackle in the book from multiple perspectives. There's a nice story on this. We were going through the manuscript with the editor of the publisher, and sitting at the table and just going line by line, basically all the kind of notes that he had made. And then at some point he mentioned that about this point I realized that I'm not anti-nuclear anymore. We were like halfway through the book, and I was like, wow, one at a time. But it's kind of, like I said, it's not about nuclear, but at some point, if you read it and kind of understand the implications, you might realize that, okay, nuclear is actually not that bad if you take a kind of holistic view on it. The book also touches on a very important topic, which is energy return on energy invested. So the net energy that we can get from energy production, and how that is important for the whole society, because it kind of defines how big part of human activity needs to go to this kind of critical stuff like energy production, primary production, food, energy, and that's about it.
Whatever. I see Chris has a question.
And how much of the kind of rest we can use for nicer things like schools and order and entertainment and whatever. Great.
Chris, what's your question?
Yeah, I know this is not your first book, Rauli. Was this book, Age of Energy, is that building on the previous books, do you think, or is that more filling in a blank space, a blank area of knowledge of the general public that you felt that you had been missing previously? What was the impetus, I guess, where you felt this book needed to be written?
So maybe a little bit of both. I in some way I kind of view my 4 books as a trilogy because two in the middle are largely about the same topic. It's nuclear energy and its role in climate change mitigation. The first one was about oil's role in society, discussing peak oil and whether our kind of Western societies are prepared for the peaking of oil, and that's actually how I kind of get interested in the energy, because I don't have a kind of educational background in energy or engineering or anything like that. I'm more of a communication department guy. But that got me interested in energy, and then I got interested in nuclear because I kind of saw that this is something that seems to be widely misunderstood, and then I wanted to kind of make the case for that. But after that, I felt that, and my writing colleague Aki Suakko, he actually proposed that we write the book, because we had been writing and discussing these wider topics around the internet for some years then, and we kind of felt that, okay, now we have maybe enough of a kind of holistic view of the situation and enough knowledge about the details on the economics side and the engineering side and all these types of things, that we can write this kind of what is the role of energy in modern society from all the relevant points of view. And then we got to it, and I'm glad we did. The Finnish version did win the Science Book of the Year award here in Finland when it came back. So that's pretty much my kind of peak accomplishment in books, at least.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Gabe, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. You talk about after a certain point that the happiness index, I guess what you referred to, doesn't it doesn't go up that much. And I always kind of think that, well, for one thing, GDP is a bad way of gauging things. But aside from that, I mean, when people get to a certain point in terms of the industrialization process and everything, what people want when they have everything else is more leisure time, shorter work week, more vacation time, early retirement. So I don't know if you spoke about that in your book at all.
Yeah, and it's not so simple. I mean, we like to think that we want those things, but then when we have choice of starting to work 4 days a week instead of 5, but losing some income, we often still choose to work 5 days a week or 6 days a week to get even more money, instead of kind of realizing that I actually have enough to have a good life now. So there's this kind of weird drive that we humans have to accumulate stuff, more and more and more resources, because there's always something to fear, like what if I get sick, or what if somebody in my family gets sick? Do I have enough money? Well, in Europe we have maybe let's say, I hesitate to say better, but the healthcare system here does not ruin people as easily as in the United States. Let's just put it this way. But anyway, we have these kind of fears that we have, and then there's studies on kind of what makes people happy or content, and what makes them unhappy and angry. And for example, if we increase our, let's say, wealth or income even a little bit, it's much easier to accept that the neighbor gets a little bit more. But it's much harder for us, like statistically, to accept a reduction if the neighbor stays at the same level. So we're kind of loss averse in a sense, and even so, it's easier to share a growing pie than start to think about how we kind of share our shrinking pie. And that's an argument in defense of growth. Historically, there's been a lot of examples that when economic growth turns negative or stops, there becomes social unrest, xenophobia, this kind of hard values start to gain ground. It's actually something that may be happening right about now, because there's a lot of and that's also part of the times becoming harder. For example, Russia invading Ukraine, and we had the COVID epidemic that was kind of really hard for many people. So it seems that in hard times, people look for authority and kind of clarity instead of liberty and freedom. But the same thing happens also with economic growth. When there is no growth, we kind of become a little bit xenophobic and are more suspect of strangers, and are more easily kind of angered and look for authorities. So yeah, liberalism needs growth. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, it's weird, because there's also a lot of kind of liberal, left-leaning, degrowth-leaning people who think that, who would maybe prefer that was not the case.
That is certainly a very, very pertinent topic, and there's a lot of people who are really searching for the idea that we can save ourselves by managing societal growth, managing our exploitation of resources, managing how much we consume and where it's consumed, and it's built on this, this mythology that if not for capitalism, if not for the big bad out there, everything would be much more efficient. Does the history of humankind, does that really play out in any way, or is it maybe a false comparison to say that without the seeking of profit, we would be better magically?
Well, a couple things. First, there's a problem with the definition of capitalism. Mm-hmm. When people start talking about capitalism, they usually mean completely different things. And when you talk about capitalism, it's actually dependent on the period of history that you refer to. So we have agrarian capitalism, and now we had industrial capitalism when the industrial revolution started, and now we might have, let's say, petroleum capitalism, and soon we might have AI capitalism. It's kind of what is the driving force in the capitalistic society, and capitalism is a great system in that sense that it's very adaptable to the situation. So if something changes, capitalism changes with it and kind of finds the new. It's like a river. If somebody blocks it, it just finds a new way to kind of keep on going. And then I had another point, but I'm not sure if I remember it anymore.
That's all right. Gabe has a question.
Yeah, I saw recently, and I think this gets more into the meat of your book, I believe. I saw recently that I'm sorry, I've got a little frog in my throat there. I saw recently that on Facebook there was like a meme with this. They showed this big pools, and they said this is really nasty stuff, this lithium, right? And they said, well, so are EVs really clean? And in terms of both that and resource scarcity, and even the problems they have with the fires and everything. I mean, what's your assessment of the EV going forward?
I just remembered my other point, but then I forgot it again. It's a little bit late for me, so you have to understand. EVs, let's say they for sure they have their problems, but you need to compare it with the current thing. Like, for example, if you're worried about how much stuff we need to mine, then you would maybe need to compare that to the amount of oil that needs to be mined or pumped to run internal combustion engine vehicles. So I would say that the optimist in me would say that sure, there's going to be environmental damage due to, for example, mining and lithium production and whatever. We should regulate that, and we should be worried of that. And one of the things that I'm a little bit worried is that if we push the transition to EVs too hard, then there will be countries and locations, regions, which will throw the environmental regulations to the bin and just like produce what the market demands, never mind the environmental destruction. And this is probably something that's, well, at least according to some reports I've read, this is already happening in China, where a lot of this kind of rare earth mining is actually not legal or not kind of made official. So there's quite a bit of that. Yeah. But as the kind of fleet grows, eventually we will be able to start recycle the battery materials more and more. Mm-hmm. So it will take time and there will be environmental consequences, but at some point we will have a relatively stable fleet. And from what I've learned, it will actually be preferential to mine the resources for the new batteries from the old batteries because they are quite concentrated there compared to mining them in virgin rock, let's say. But I mean, as long as the fleet is growing, then you will also need virgin materials because your kind of aging fleet of old vehicles doesn't age at large enough scale to produce for the new vehicles. So that's going to take like 50 years. Wow. Maybe more. Let's see.
There's I think I see a hypothesis brewing in some of our one of our ex-commenters, and they're asking about various things about using increased land usage and lack of oil in, for instance, the East Asia part of the world. And is there sort of a knock-on effect where places like Europe and America are very sensitive about land use, and so the economic development at the current time, like you say, they're looking for virgin materials, they're looking for an easy way of developing these technology trains. Is this going to backlash geopolitically? Is it going to reverse one day? Are we looking at a temporary, as you say, a temporary trend?
Well, I'd say that in the last couple of years, this kind of geopolitical situation with critical materials has kind of become more popular, and our leaders, great leaders, have realized that shit, we cannot rely on China supplying everything and them maybe not using that as a lever or a weapon or whatever you want to call it. So I think at least in the United States, there's some mining projects for critical minerals already, and I think there's been some talk about it in the European Union as well. But maybe the problem is that we've kind of maybe we've been spoiled in a way that we don't want to see the cost that producing our well-being causes.
Yeah.
So out of sight, out of mind, let somebody else do it somewhere else, so we don't have to kind of see it, and we just get to enjoy the nice EV or smartphone or television or whatever is the case. So that's something that I would kind of I'd like us to wake up on, kind of like we have to be able to mine minerals in our own countries as well, and kind of just face the fact that otherwise you're just moving the problem to be somebody else's problem. Then again, we are paying them to do that, so they do get benefit out of it. So these are always kind of multi-perspective things. Whether the miners somewhere would have a job if we wouldn't buy the things that we buy. Who knows?
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, in this age of energy, do you feel, I assume that's going to be continuing on for a long time, maybe permanently, because energy will support, if we have an age of AI, that's going to be energy intensive. But do you feel that that's going to spread to the underdeveloped countries in a way that does not cause further wars and so forth? Can they come up to near the European or American standards of living in the next century?
I will defend their right to try, which is not something that many are willing to consider. I mean, I've gone through some reports, both from the IEA and Greenpeace. They have their projections for energy use in Africa per capita, for example, and they are pretty much, those projections are kind of implying that people will remain relatively poor for the next 50 years. And from what I've learned, secondhand knowledge, they have not consulted with these people that whether they want to remain poor or whether they would actually like to increase their energy consumption to levels closer to what are we using in the West. So that I think is a little bit arrogant. So yeah, there might be a surprise coming. I kind of hope there is. I do hope that we would manage to do it in a clean way. So nuclear, wind, solar, hydro, maybe some other stuff. Because otherwise they're just gonna burn everything that's left of the fossil fuel reserves to climb that ladder. and then who knows what will happen after that. Either we will have managed the transition or we have not. And there's going to be a more or less slow or quick decline in energy use.
Sounds like projections and reports from countries that are part of the G20, the 20 more affluent nations, don't see a way to get rich off of allowing the poor countries to become better, to become their equals in lifestyle. And so that the G20 countries see them as remaining poor, and the poor countries are looking and saying that, we in the wealthy countries went through this over the past century. Now it's their turn to do it, even if they have to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, so to speak. And and I can see that disconnect a little bit.
There's a kind of conflict. One of the worst conflicts about the kind of degrowth movement on a global scale is that the degrowth people mainly come from rich countries where they can easily see in their daily lives, okay, I could use less energy here, I could use less materials there, and then they kind of apply that to everybody, while the reality in kind of 80% of the countries and people around the world is completely different. They would very much like to use more materials and more energy. So that's one of the kind of key weaknesses that I see on this kind of degrowth thinking on a global scale. If only 10% of the people are in a position that they can comfortably decrease their materials and energy consumption by 20-30% and still live a decent life, then that's a drop in the global bucket where 90% or 80% of the people want to 10x their materials and energy consumption.
Gabe, well, let's do one more round of questions between Gabe and you, and then we'll do a little topic change. Go ahead, Gabe.
Okay. Yeah. Well, speaking of degrowth, of course, it's not good as a policy. No country would choose to degrow. However, the IPCC has stated that a reduction in consumption is important in order to be able to tackle decarbonization. I've read that. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, well, that's the assumption that the rich people can do something that the poor people cannot and will not
Obviously.
do. And that is problematic and unlikely. I think that's a big risk to take when you model scenarios or projections for energy use, because if you don't account for the enormous amount of extra demand that will come from the developing world for energy supply, then you are not seeing the scale of the problem that you face. And then when you plan your policies for a much smaller problem, you're not doing enough. Then maybe you start to think that, okay, well, maybe we can just do this without expanding nuclear and just add wind and solar and batteries and stuff like that. Whether if you would realize the scale of the whole kind of global problem, there would be no way you could think that we can do this with a limited set of tools, and even with all the tools available, scale to the maximum, it will be enormous challenge.
Yeah.
One thought I had similar to Gabe. When we use energy, we always think about how much energy can we get, rather than how much energy do we need. If we were to insulate our buildings better, if we'd have more public transportation, which Europe is ahead of the United States in that regard by far. But if we could just be more efficient in how we use energy and why we need energy. I mean, there are places in the United States with very thin glass windows. And living in Finland, in the wintertime, you should have thicker windows and maybe double windows so that
You
you
actually
do
have
not
3
waste
layers
energy. Yes. So you
nowadays.
don't waste energy. Your furnace is
Yeah.
not running 23 hours a day trying to keep you warm. It may only run 1.5 or 2 hours a day if you don't open the
Yeah.
doors coming and going. So if you have good insulation, so I think that's something that we overlook, that side of the energy equation.
Yeah, as long as energy is very cheap, then you don't have to pay attention to these things. But the thing is that at the time you make an investment, for example, you build a house and you choose whether to not use insulation or 3-layered windows or whatever, you don't know the cost of energy 20 years from that day.
Very true.
So it might be very cheap at that time, but I mean, we learned a couple of years ago that all it takes is one rogue nation to attack another, and energy prices 10x in Europe.
10
very
times?
fast.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, natural gas prices went
For a few
totally
months.
bananas here when we kind of decided that.
That's very intense.
Well, yeah. But the thing is that if you compare European living standards to the North American living standards, they are not very different. I would say we have a slightly different systems how we run our society. We have more kind of public sector stuff. But the difference between energy consumption is on the order of North Americans using double the amount of energy to get the similar level of well-being than the Europeans. So certainly there's lessons to be learned and improvements that could be made. But you also have to take notice of the thing that we in Europe, we are much more densely populated. So, for example, public transportation is much more feasible here compared to United States, which is a big place with fewer people than in Europe. So there's these differences, but for sure, there could be many improvements to be made and still kind of live. But the thing is that then you get rebound, and that's also something that we discuss in the book quite a lot. If my heating bill decreases by $100, then after I paid for the investment, then I have an extra $100 every month. So I'm gonna maybe fly to Thailand or the Canary Islands, or buy a new car earlier, or eat out more, or anyway, I'm gonna consume more something else.
There's a law for that. I forget the name of it.
Yeah.
Do you remember? I don't know.
There is
Jevons paradox. Jevons paradox. Yes.
That's with the coal thing, is that when you become more efficient, you actually increase the use because it's more worthwhile of using something if you get more out of it. I think modernly it's called rebound effect. And that one of the things that we've also criticized in actually multiple of our books is the fact that organizations like IEA and IPCC and whatever, they for a long time they didn't account for rebound happening. So if you looked at this kind of energy consumption projections from them, they assumed that like 50% of the kind of, well, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how it went, but there was a lot riding on the fact that we would become much more efficient in our energy use. So more efficient appliances, fuel switching to more efficient fuels and usage, and all this kind of switching the LED lights. And there's a lot of these layers, and all of them assume that we would just save the energy and not use it for something else. Because in this case, energy is the same thing as money, which is kind of naive and undermines the whole kind of problem. Again, you face a future scenario which is much smaller than the actual problem that you will likely face, and then you plan your programs and targets to answer the smaller problem, and then when the bigger problem becomes evident, you're fucked because you're not prepared to deal with that.
Yeah, but if the energy efficiency is saved clear across the board for the planes and everything, then you will get a drop. That way, even if you do spend the extra money, you will get a drop in the amount of energy use, right?
Well, it depends. There's certainly a limit how much energy we can use because time is limited.
Yeah.
and humans are limited in their capability of multitasking. I can only ride in one airplane at a time. Let's just put it that way.
Right. My understanding, in Ontario, they started to get rid of their windmills shortly after they were switching to LED lights, and so everyone's electricity bill went down. And so suddenly they started leaving their LED lights in their homes and apartments on all the time in Ontario because it was so cheap to them. That's kind of what you've been talking about. They didn't care about energy.
We come up with new uses that suddenly if lighting, for example, becomes much more cheap, suddenly you start to have much more light pollution, like big advertisement screens that are on 24/7 because it's so cheap. So we come up with new uses for cheaper energy. The cheaper it gets, the more uses we come up with, at least until some point. I think there is a just kind of, you could model it on a curve.
Well, we are coming up to the usual end of our program, so let's give Rauli some time to talk about another topic. And in this case, I think we're really interested in Think Atom and specifically nuclear advocacy in Europe and in Finland. There's a lot of noise about EDF building new reactors, Poland building reactors. I'm really excited to hear what is Think Atom doing these days, and what do you think your next targets are in terms of advocacy?
Yeah, like I said, we saw a big change in the public discussion in Finland around 2017 and 18. That's when we published our first study on the kind of deep decarbonization with advanced nuclear, and then nuclear district heating, and started to kind of discuss these new uses for nuclear. And I feel that Finland was kind of a forerunner in that discussion here in Europe. So our society maybe never gave up on nuclear in the same way that many other countries here in Europe gave up. So from that perspective, it's been extremely frustrating to kind of see the acceptance here in Finland and see the need in Finland and in Europe, but then you run against the kind of anti-nuclear establishment of Brussels, the European Commission and the European Parliament, and people there who are structurally anti-nuclear. The whole kind of institutions and assumptions that they work on are built on being anti-nuclear, or like excluding it from any table of negotiation. So that was really frustrating. On the other hand, for the last 2 years, mainly since Russia attacked Ukraine, we've seen a quite swift turnaround on the great leaders and how they talk about nuclear and what targets they have. So that's been really interesting to see. Well, the next worry for me is will the industry be able to deliver? Because it has not been, especially in the West, it has not been delivering. We've had some projects and they've had their reasons for going over budget and being late on delivery. But and the thing is, if we want to build nuclear, we need to build a lot of it. Otherwise, it's going to be too expensive. So we need to build more and more and more of the same thing to learn and get the costs down. So I'm a little bit afraid whether the nuclear industry, like the whole supply chain, is able to deliver on those assumptions, whether the policies will support this kind of serial manufacturing or serial production, or whether there will be like giving license to one plant here and then you build it, and then giving license to another plant here and then you again build it from scratch, like, and not learning that much. So but it's really interesting to see this kind of change happening and now it's slowly getting into the kind of Brussels. We have nuclear alliance here in Europe now with multiple countries as members. We just managed to get nuclear recognized as a critical technology. Well, it only produces half of our clean electricity, so why would somebody call it critical? That was ridiculous. But now those things are slowly getting fixed. It's still biased towards kind of renewables, this and renewables that, but it's getting better by the day. And there's a real kind of shift in the thing that now it's okay to be a politician who is pro-nuclear. 5 years ago, it was not okay. And that was something that the Green Party, for example, here in Finland, were very influential in that some of their members came out publicly, came out from the closet, so to speak, and said that, okay, we're going to need new nuclear, and we should build more nuclear, and we should make a policy environment that allows for that. And when those first ones came out, then it was much easier for the second and the third and the fourth. And now everybody's like, it's no longer something that people hide. They can be openly pro-nuclear. And now that's also, there's more and more the situation in Brussels and many European countries. So that's extremely nice. But now that the industry has to deliver on budget and on schedule, there's a question here.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris, and we're going to get our closing comments in with this.
I seem to remember like 8 years ago, there was a feasibility study on using industrial heating from nuclear to heat the towns of Helsinki. Was that part of yours? And I've got a little follow up to that too. If we kind of let the renewables people have electricity, and we focus nuclear on industrial uses, do you think they would care as much?
Yeah, I made a couple of studies on district heating for nuclear. One was specifically for Helsinki, and one was for larger Finland. And some of the institutions here have also made some calculations, which are maybe a little bit more academic on that. So there's a lot of analysis on that. And basically what they realized, and this was maybe 5 years ago, is that when we still had low electricity prices, was that if you want to do nuclear, the best economically proposition was to do district heating. That was the highest value. I mean, it was ridiculous, but producing heat at 100 degrees, so like boiling point water, was more valuable in the market than producing electricity, for which you would need 3 times the heat at much higher temperature and turbines and all that shit.
Which Finland is a more northern country as well, so
yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, well, there's that. Yeah. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah. I was wondering, would we have as much pushback from renewables people if we let them have their electricity, and nuclear focused more on industrial uses?
This is actually something that I've had a focus on for, well, think, Adam, the main focus is to think about sectors that we could decarbonize that are not the electricity sector. So that has been basically my focus for over 5 years, and it is effective because there is a case to be made. In Europe, it's less than 25% of energy is used as electricity. Globally, it's about 20%, so even less. So there's a lot of fossil fuels being used outside of electricity generation, in heat, in fuels, in all that stuff. So that's also a perfect case for SMRs, like advanced reactors and small reactors, because usually if you have an industrial park, it doesn't have gigawatts of demand. It maybe has hundreds of megawatts. So for that, a small reactor would be enough to supply maybe both industrial heat and some power as well. And to kind of search for and study and popularize those use cases has been the kind of mission of Think Atom, pretty much. So we've done district heating, we've done hydrogen production, synthetic fuels, all kind of stuff around that. And I'd say that it's a good, you don't have to argue with at least not the same arguments with renewables people. Yeah, I have nothing against renewables being deployed, and if they can take care of the electricity sector, which I doubt due to the kind of variability of the production profile. But I mean, maybe we can manage a quite big share of those there. But for heat and for synthetic fuels, for hydrogen generation, you would prefer to have reliable sources like nuclear.
Well,
Right.
thank you so much. Do you have any closing thoughts before we usher everyone out of the podcast?
Well, I could tell you a couple words about my latest project, just to kind of give an update. So I'm working in a study on called the case for waste, in which I kind of bring up the case whether Finland could or should start to offer final repository services for other countries' spent nuclear fuel, because we have been leaders in building and are now commissioning our first deep geological repository here in Finland for the domestic waste here. So that's going to start operations probably next year. So quite soon. And yeah, we've gone through that process, and in the study I explore how big the market is and how big the impact would be for the global nuclear industry if this kind of hard questions about how we manage the waste, because it's always one of the kind of anti-nuclear project arguments is that you don't have a solution for the waste. Well, now we would have a solution, and it would be available and proven and all that stuff. How much easier would it be to deploy nuclear, and maybe how much lower cost you could get for your financing if this risk was kind of taken care of. So there's a lot of potential benefits, both globally and for the people in Finland, if we start accepting the waste, because there's a lot of funds available to storing that waste as well. So obviously we would take the money as well, and not just the spent fuel. And obviously then you also have the option of reprocessing and maybe going for a breeder reactor program where you can start turning that spent fuel into clean energy in the future. I mean, if it happens 10 years, 20 years from now, in the kind of time frame of deep geological repositories, that's an eye blink.
My next guest loves to perform because he loves audiences.
Gabe, you're
However, audiences.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that study is going to come out in second quarter this year. It's well on its way to being ready, and
Wonderful.
yeah, let's see. My hope is to start a decent discussion here in Finland, and if we still want to shoot it down, and because right now the legislation prohibits this type of activity, so we would have to change the legislation. But I want to have the discussion around that and tell the people the benefits, the issues, and consequences and bottlenecks and all that stuff. And then if we decide to not take it, then okay, that's fine. I think that we should seriously consider it and stuff like that. But I want it to be an informed decision. So if we think we can pay our retirements with a shrinking population without these type of kind of out of the box initiatives, then okay, I guess.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. Thank you, Rauli. It's very late there, I understand, and we want to let you enjoy the rest of your evening, or maybe just let you go to bed now.
Crash on the bed and go to sleep.
Great.
It was nice. Yeah.
Thank you. This has been the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. You can find us every 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, on the Eco-Modernist channel on YouTube. That's Eco-Modernist 1. You can find us at my personal Twitch, Soyaddle, soyaddle.tv, twitch.tv/Soyaddle. You can find us on Facebook at the Eco-Modernist channel, at the Eco-Modernist Society of North America, on the web at ESNA.earth. And of course, you can find us on Patreon at the Eco-Modernist channel. For the low cost of $1 to $2, you can help us support the mission and join us as a valued contributor. Thank you so much, and remember, emissions first, peace and justice will follow.
I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in